Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this workshop, Teaching in the Time of ChatGPT. I'm Dr. Julia Gossard, Associate Dean for Research at Utah State University and an Associate Professor of History. This workshop is sponsored by a teaching exchange between Utah State University's Office of Empowering Teaching Excellence and the State University of New York-Plattsburgh. So in the fall, Utah State University is offering a teaching workshop, and in the spring, SUNY Plattsburgh will also be sharing one, which will be very exciting to get to meet people across the country. So today in this teaching workshop, I'm going to share a little bit about my research in progress on the use of generative AI in the college classroom, especially in the humanities and social sciences. I'm a historian by training, so that's really where I find myself, is at the intersection of humanities and social sciences. I'm going to discuss some of the challenges that I and my colleagues have faced teaching during this period of time, especially with the rise of generative AI. And I'm going to share some examples of assessments that I've created over the past year that have really been a response to the rise of ChatGPT and other AI. There's also going to be some time for brainstorming and questioning at the end, and an opportunity for you to share some of your perspectives as well. I think teaching workshops like this are a great opportunity for us to really connect and share that information. Now, I'm going to start out by saying I am not providing any revolutionary or radical solutions to the moment that we find ourselves in higher education. I'm also not railing against the use of generative AI. Instead, I'm providing my own perspectives as a humanist, as a social scientist, teaching at a very large R1 land and space grant university with a significant online student population and a large statewide system. And I'm hoping that my experiences can resonate with you, maybe share some ideas, and at least perhaps the research in progress can help shade your experiences with how you're teaching and how you're responding to the current moment. On the screen too, you'll notice that I have a QR code that you can scan that will take you to a box of resources. I also have a tiny URL there that you can type into your web browser. I welcome you to peruse those resources, and we'll look at them together towards the end of the workshop. So I know that many of you are here because you are worried that AI can complete your course's assignments, and that really scares you. And I'll be honest, that is a scary thought. I totally understand that. The fact of the matter is that students do use artificial intelligence, and there's likely little that we can do to stop them from using it. But you are the creator of your own destiny, you're the master of your own course, and you're the master of your students within that course. So you can make a decision to either teach with it or to teach against it. And so I'm going to share my thought processes and my experiences as I came to teach with generative AI. But either choice is a perfectly acceptable one. I'm going to start off by sharing a little bit of the preliminary findings from my IRB-approved research project titled ChatGPT in the College Classroom. This has 3 phases to it, and we just finished the first phase on October 31st that surveyed so far 102 students from summer 2023 and this first half of fall 2023. It's primarily come from humanities and social science majors, and really a large variety of that from history are there. And so this is a qualitative participant survey where I asked questions about their use of generative AI in college. It's anonymous, but they do know that I am the one who is doing the survey. So we do have to take maybe their answers with a tiny grain of salt, right? That's there. This is completely anonymous. IP tracking is turned off. I have made it clear that there are no repercussions for what they tell me, but we do have to be somewhat skeptical as well. But a lot of the answers here really were surprising to me and interesting. And I want to share this data because it helped me to start thinking about additional ways to teach during this period and has shaded some of my decisions and some of my thought process with this. So as I mentioned, as of October 31st, phase 1 is done. Phase 2 will go through the rest of fall and into spring, and phase 3 will be through next summer and fall. Many of these students are humanities and social science students, as I have mentioned. So that is just something to keep in mind. The first question that I asked them on this survey is a very simple one. Have you ever used generative AI programs such as ChatGPT to complete an assignment in college? Out of the 102 students, 100 answered yes, and 2 answered no. So this is pretty consistent with some of the more informal conversations that I've had with students, with fellow colleagues about, the use of GPT in the classroom or other parts of generative AI. But interestingly, when I asked those same students to report how frequently they use ChatGPT and other AI like Perplexity or Google's Bard to complete assignments, it appears that for the same sample size, at least, it's not happening as frequently as I might have feared or even imagined that they were doing. Students who use it every day or reported that they use it every day are tied with those who might use it 1 to 2 times per week in the third most frequent category behind 1 to 2 times per month and never. So that was an interesting development in terms of how frequently are these students using it. But some of you are probably pointing out, hey, there's an inconsistency here. Because in this reporting of never, we still had 100 students who admitted to using it before. So perhaps there are 20 students who are untruthful, or maybe there are 20 students who misinterpreted the question. This is always a research methodology issue I have to consider a little bit there, but it's just something for us to consider. It also could be that they have used it once and never ever used it again. So it's more in the present tense. What we can tell from this, though, is that students are using it, but maybe not as frequently as we might have imagined. The survey then asks these participants for an explanation of why they do or do not use ChatGPT. And I got a lot of different qualitative answers here that I went through and I coded, put them into various different categories, and I created a word cloud based upon those categories of, what are some of the most common reasons why they're using it and why they're not using it. Students explained that they use ChatGPT for assignments that they view as busy work or not strongly benefiting their learning outcomes. So for things that they're viewing is simply a check mark and a checkbox that they have to complete to get towards the assignments. It's something that is so low stakes or low cognitive, really difficulty that they're just using GPT to do it because it's not worth their time. A lot of that comes down to the fact, too, that maybe that assignment hasn't been fully explained to them. They don't understand the structure of the course, and students did mention that as well. So that's something for us to keep in mind as we're considering how we might make changes to our courses. Even if we have these small, formative, frequent assignments that students may view as busy work, why do we include them? Why have we decided to have them there? What is our purpose? Sometimes making that a little bit clearer to students could mean that they're going to take those assignments perhaps more seriously or engage with them on their own versus choosing to have ChatGPT create them. Now, what's interesting, though, is that while they're having them complete assignments that they view as really, really easy, things that aren't worth their time, they're also using GPT and other AI as a tool to help them with things that they find very, very difficult. If they didn't fully understand a concept, a theory, or a mathematical process, a lot of my students, I'm thinking because a lot of them are humanists and social scientists, reported that they're using GPT or Perplexity or another AI system to help them with science and math or computer science courses to really show them the work of how they get to a particular answer. And they're reporting that they didn't understand the concept. Maybe they felt like it wasn't taught super well or that the learning material didn't go over the concept. So they're using this as an additional tool, almost like a tutor, to help them in that way. And it's interesting that we see that divide on both sides of the pendulum. Something that's super easy they're using it for, and something that is super difficult they're using it for as well. Now, students who report that they do not use it said that they don't use it most often because of their concerns with plagiarism and with cheating. And in fact, in these written responses, it's quite funny at times because there's a lot of vitriol shared between students to other students who are using GPT and AI as a way to, take the easy way out and get through course requirements that they feel they've really had to work hard with. So it's interesting to see that sort of judgment call that students are making of other students choosing to use this. The other most frequently cited issue of why students aren't using it or choose not to use is because they feel the quality is not very good. A lot of students mention that the quality is okay. It's oftentimes passable, but it's average, not above average, and certainly not exceptional. I had several students mention that the time that they would take to make the answer or the product good is just as much time as they would have spent doing the assignment themselves. So why not take that time to do that? They've paid for that time. They feel like they're paying for the class. So they might as well do that instead of taking a shortcut that turns out not to be a shortcut. So those are some of the reasons why they're saying they're using it or not using it. And I find that very interesting. And I'm interested to see how that develops over time in the next two phases as well. Now, going along with that, I asked, is it an academic integrity violation to use ChatGPT and other forms of generative AI? 52 responded yes, 33% responded no, and 15% responded that it depends. And for the it depends category, I allowed a text entry for a little bit more explanation. And oftentimes what I saw there was, well, if the university, the course, the professor has a strong policy against using generative AI, then you shouldn't use it, and that can be considered an academic integrity violation. If they don't, it's a gray area, and using it may or may not be violating anything. I'm really, really interested to see how this changes and how the perception of this may adapt over time in the next few phases. I have no idea where it will go, if it will stay stagnant, if these things will change, but I'm very interested to see as more and more students use this, as issues of academic integrity get brought to the forefront, how is this going to change? Now, despite the fact that almost every student admitted that they had used GPT at least once, and that the majority of students indicate that they use it at least infrequently from time to time, they had some very interesting observations when I presented scenarios about professors or instructors using GPT. I asked students if it was acceptable for an instructor to use GPT to answer their emails to students. 88 responded no. I also asked if it was acceptable for an instructor to use GPT to help them write a lecture, and 92% said no. In fact, in some of the qualitative answers with this, they're saying, no, this is your job. You are being paid for this. This is your area of expertise. This is a requirement of you to do. They're really quite adamant that we should not be using this. Yet most of them are admitting that they're doing it with their own work. So it's interesting to see some of the double standards, maybe some of the hypocrisy, or perhaps maybe some of the boundaries that they've created around the appropriate and inappropriate use of GPT. I didn't put this on the screen, but another piece that I asked them is it appropriate for you to use GPT to answer emails from instructors, peers, and even bosses in the workplace? And while it was still no, was the majority response at around 72%, there was a vast majority that said yes there. So that was, again, an interesting dichotomy and difference between how students are thinking about their use versus other people's use of this. So although this data is interesting, and again, this is all very preliminary data, and there's a lot more, but I wanted to just pull out some small pieces there. What does this data tell us, and how can we use it to inform about students, GPT, and our own teaching practices? Well, students, despite recognizing and believing that it is an academic integrity violation, are using ChatGPT, though perhaps not as frequently as we have feared. They believe that it's an essential tool in their learning, and they're using it very, very intentionally as a tool, from what I can tell from this data. How they're perceiving it is as a tool, not necessarily always a replacement for them, but as a tool to be successful in learning. They're using it to help them complete assignments that they might find daunting or difficult, as well as those assignments that they find to be a waste of their time, or to be busy work, or simply a checkbox to complete. So regardless, though, they're using it as that tool, and recognizing that, I think, is very important to seeing how students perceive this tool and how they're moving forward. So the question becomes then, how do higher education instructors like ourselves respond to the growth of generative artificial intelligence in our classrooms and in our communities? What can we do in response to this? Returning to some of the fundamentals of teaching may be very helpful. I found it a very helpful exercise in the past year to really reflect upon my own teaching philosophy, how I teach, what I teach, and why I teach, to really have that introspective to help me navigate the directions I take with my courses, with my assessments, and with my students. It can really remind me of the best practices of teaching, as well as good course design and how am I setting students up for success. This introspective moment is critical. We're really at that point with generative AI where we need to have that introspective moment. Now, I've gone to a lot of workshops, trainings, seminars. I've read a lot of blogs, think pieces. I'm sure you have to talk to a lot of colleagues about this. It's been probably the most popular conversation topic at nearly every academic event that I've been to in the past year. A lot of them ask various questions like the ones that are on the screen. And I know this is a lot of text on the screen, but I wanted to include these questions because these are ones that I've compiled from other workshops or trainings, or that I've asked myself or that I'm thinking about. And I think that these are good questions to ask yourself at this juncture, at this time. What is the purpose of your discipline within the curricular schema of your institution? What is its purpose within higher education? What's the purpose of your course within that same curricular schema, within your degree plan that's there, within higher education? What purpose does it fill? What are the top 5 things that you hope students will learn in your course? And keep in mind, that may not be the same as your learning objectives. In fact, it oftentimes is not. Are there particular skills you want students to learn? Are there theories or categories you want them to walk away with? Maybe it overlaps with your learning objectives, but it may not always do so. Make that list. Think about what you want students to walk away from your course with, and then think about how you can best achieve that. What are the skills that you hope students will gain by taking your classes? And how do your current assessments support that skill acquisition? A very personal question, but one that I think is very important at this moment because we have an opportunity to revise, and perhaps we are being forced in many instances to revise and to consider things. But a big question that you might ask yourself is, do you enjoy the assignments that you have created? Or is the rise of generative artificial intelligence in this moment really an opportunity for you to finally take the time to fix that assignment that you have not liked, or that you know your students find extremely challenging and that it's not fulfilling the needs of your students, the needs of your course, the needs of your curriculum anymore? Is this simply an opportune time to reconsider something that you don't particularly like, maybe your students don't like, and is not serving those needs? You might consider what the biggest challenges that students have had with your assignments and how you might make small tweaks and adjustments to help prepare them better for student success, or to align your assignments better to your learning outcomes and to your goals. This is also a key opportune time to consider if your assignments reflect your institution's commitment to disability equity. A large push at Utah State University has been really to make sure that we always have accessible learning materials. This, again, is another opportune moment where we're going through a change. You might take this opportunity to even use some AI tools to make your assignments more accessible for all students, to really level that playing field for all of your students. That might mean things like using captioning services or ensuring that a screen reader can read the materials that you've created. And then a very, very, very personal and perhaps touchy question is, are you scared of academic integrity violations occurring? Why or why not? Do you trust your students to not use generative AI in ways that are problematic? Why or why not? Some of us have had no problems with academic integrity violation, and some of us have had really egregious problems with it. And I think this is an opportunity for you to reflect upon what is your feelings towards academic integrity violations, and how are you going to specifically address this concern with students? Having that open transparency with students, not only about why you are or are not using generative AI, but also why you're concerned about academic integrity and what you consider, not only your institution, but you consider to be that is so important to establishing that trusting relationship and establishing parameters for both ethical and professional conduct in your classroom. So I want you to consider these questions, and as you reflect, as I did, you may make a pro-con list to either teach against generative AI or to teach with it, which is exactly what I've done. So I want to share some of the ideas that I've had in teaching against generative AI with my pro-con list, and then some of the ideas I have for teaching with generative AI in addition to my pro-con list that's there. So the most common and pervasive response to generative AI that I hear is that people have gone back to that old school method. I'm sure that, you've heard this, maybe you've thought that's exactly what you're going to do. And like I said, I think that's a perfectly acceptable response for right now, especially as generative AI really saw an uptick, right before the start of the fall semester. The only thing that maybe you might have had bandwidth to do, and you were concerned about this, is to go back to Blue Book exams. And that's a fine response, but you're going to have to think carefully if that's the way you want to move forward with this as well. Others have told me that they have adopted oral assessments, including oral exams and other forms of oral assignments much more frequently, because again, that controls the space that students are basically giving the information and taking the exam. It's far less likely through an oral exam that they maybe use generative AI. But then I question, if you're having them give presentations and speeches, did ChatGPT or another software just write that? So it's something to consider that's there. So I see some pros and cons to this particular approach, right? I think the other thing that we could do too is just have very strong policies against the use of generative AI, with the understanding, this is something Jessamine and I were talking about earlier, there's not a very reliable tool at the moment that says, yes, this was definitively created by generative AI. So we have to be careful too about what we're accusing students of and make sure that we truly have that evidence or have the conversations with students. So the pros of this obviously are, this is a traditional format. Students are going to be used to taking multiple choice exams, to taking maybe in-class examinations, even if they're Blue Book. This is something that maybe even those students who have test anxiety, they may feel a little bit more comfortable with this format. It fits with those traditional forms of learning, right? You as the instructor also have immense control over how students complete the exam through these more traditional forms of learning. It lowers your risk of academic integrity violation, and it does emphasize content memorization, right? Especially multiple choice tests. I had somebody recently at USU ask if a Scantron machine still existed, which I hadn't thought about Scantron machines in probably a decade. Turns out, no, we don't have a Scantron machine anymore. But those are some of the pros of this approach. If that's a discipline, if you're in a science discipline where you really, biology 10-10, where you're wanting them to memorize theorems and facts and names, that's something that you might want to pursue. The cons, though, here are that these are typically not considered to be high impact practices. Now, oral presentations could be high impact practices. It really depends upon how you design that. But generally, these are really asking students to take a more passive role to learning. It's not having them necessarily create something new and original and apply a lot of the knowledge. It's more of repetition and rote memorization for the most part, typically. I also want to point out that oral presentations are super time consuming, both for your students as well as for you. So, that's something to consider there. They also pose really significant challenges for our disabled students, for those students who are hard of hearing, maybe have a speech impediment, as well as for those who are debilitated by social anxiety and the prospect of public speaking. It may also very much unfairly advantage native English speakers. And that's something that I think we have to consider very carefully, especially at institutions of higher learning like Utah State and like SUNY, where we have a large population of non-native speakers and immigrant students and students who just English is not their first language. And, oral presentations take a long time to grade. Blue Book exams take a long time to grade. Multiple choice don't. So that could be a benefit for you in terms of time-saving techniques if you want the multiple choice exam. But the other thing I want to mention too is handwriting is not good. I don't know the last time you looked at your students' handwriting, but it is not good. I'm an early modern historian, and I have to take paleography professional development quite a lot to be able to learn the handwriting from the 17th and 18th centuries. And I just want to say the handwriting of our students can be much, much worse during that period. So that's just something to consider. If you make the choice though, or if you start thinking about teaching with generative AI, here's some of the examples of things that, I have thought about a little bit. And I'm finding myself trying to implement some of these small assessments and incorporate generative AI, as well as critical elements of generative AI into my classroom. So some examples might include using AI apps on certain assignments and in certain ways. So for instance, if you have students make a presentation, right, you might encourage them to use Canva, not Canvas, but Canva's magic design tool, which helps them to create a really nice template for their presentations that can take away some of the time that might be spent on, really tweaking PowerPoint, where they could be doing a bit more deep content memorization. Critical essays of AI-generated responses and prompts are there. Brainstorming and source selection of assignments. We'll look at these critical essays as well as brainstorming here in just a second of things that I've done. You also may have them do show your work assignments, which could be essays or process essays, focusing a little bit more on how they got to the answer versus the final product that is there. Of course, community engaged learning experiences can be an opportunity, along with authentic assessments. Now, I know this is a term used in higher education and K-12 education of authentic. I don't really know what an inauthentic assessment would be, but doing things like problem-based learning, group projects, that applied learning, that active applied learning could be good there. The pros here is that this is high impact practices. It gives students experience working with AI tools, which, as we know, is only going to become more pervasive in their lives. So we're giving them the opportunity to experiment, to learn how to use it in the college classroom. This also provides us an opportunity to have more creative assignments that may have a more real-world application to them, may emphasize those skills. And certainly this is a way that we can also bring the community into our classroom and make important bridges in that way. But at the same time that all of those things are true, there are also some significant challenges to this. Obviously, this is going to be time consuming for instructors to come up with these assessments if they don't already have them. And some students may be very hesitant to embrace those creative elements of the assignments. I've had, especially history students, really resist the creative elements. They just want to write the paper, or they want to take the test. They do not want to do the creative assignments. And part of that too is my being very forthright with them about the purpose that's there. Oftentimes, if I explain why they're doing it, they're more receptive to at least try it. Of course, if you make group work, there's always going to be difficulty with group work. And it could encourage skills over content mastery. So those are some of the challenges of teaching with generative AI or making, tweaks to your assessment that are there. So if you make the choice to choose with AI or against AI, no matter what, you should really remember that you can't change everything at once. And you probably shouldn't try to change everything at once. That is overwhelming. Instead, you might adopt what James Lang and Flower Darby have called small teaching. And you might start very small. Consider making small changes to current assessments or to your course design. Importantly, as you make these small tweaks, adjustments, and changes, be sure that you have explained that purpose of the assessment and why students are suddenly using AI and how this connects back to the learning objectives. Explaining the why of course assessment and design is absolutely necessary. So remember, you can start small that are there. You don't have to completely redo all of your assignments, your entire course. You can start on a small basis, see how it goes. That's what I started doing this past summer. I started making very small tweaks, and I've started to make larger and larger tweaks to the point the next semester when I'm teaching an upper division, actually our history senior capstone course, the final culminating learning experience, there's going to be a lot of AI embedded in there, but I've gained the personal confidence to know what I'm comfortable using AI on and what I'm not comfortable. So I want to share a wide variety of examples that I have used in my courses, which include a lower division survey, a upper division survey, as well as an honors course that teach with generative AI elements. So this is a QR code that you can scan, but there's also a tiny URL here. And so that's at the end, it's an IJ8EVZ. Perhaps Jessamine or Travis could post that into the chat for us. I'm just checking the chat really quick. Great. So I'm going to go over just a few of these examples quickly because I do want to leave enough time for us to have a discussion and for some of you to share your ideas as well. So in History 1110, which is European history from 1500 to the present, I have a number of weekly formative assignments where I ask students to really practice things like primary source selection, primary source analysis, short writing, concise argumentative writing. This really scaffolds skills that they're going to need to do throughout the course. So each week they're practicing skills that they need for maybe a midterm assessment or a final assessment where they're doing this on a small scale. So this is an example of what I might consider to be a very small tweak. Previous to this, I actually had students explain 19th century liberalism to me using primary sources. So I provided them a prompt where I basically said, define political and economic liberalism in the 19th century using primary source evidence. Well, I pushed that on its head. And this was a very small change that I did this summer, which was simply, I asked ChatGPT to explain 19th century liberalism to me, and it popped out a definition and an answer. And it popped out a definition and an answer that's okay. It's not great, but it's okay. It's passable, but it doesn't use any sources. It doesn't really provide a deep analysis. And what I'm asking students to do is to critique it. And to, in 150 to 200 words, again, a very short writing prompt there. How would you improve the definition using examples from assigned primary sources and course lectures? So I'm asking them, based upon the material that you have learned, how can you apply the knowledge that you have been interacting with here to assess and critique this? My point there, again, is not only to practice those skills, but also to give them a little nod of, hey, I've played with this before. I know what these answers look like. Although I'm not going to be able to say definitively you've used it, I'm going to show you, yeah, it's okay, but it's not the best answer that there could be. And how can I teach you how to assess these answers? How can I give you that sort of literacy that you need to be able to use this as a tool going forward? Students have a choice of about 40 of these types of assignments, not all using ChatGPT. Some of them are multiple choice, some of them are short answers, some of them are analyzing political cartoons or even drawing me their own political cartoons that are there. But the ones that are with AI, I will say in summer and now in fall, I've seen a huge amount of choice happening with students gravitating towards these ones. They want to interact with it. I would say that they're choosing this probably 2 to 3 times more than the other choices. I had this one in week 4. As you can see, it's part 3. It's the third option that they could choose. And I would say the majority of students out of 180 chose to complete this one. So it's interesting to see how they are also desiring going to those sorts of assessments. So that's a very formative assessment that took me just a very little amount of time to create. It's very low stakes for the students, but it is teaching them how to use that tool. What is necessary to take something that ChatGPT created and make it better. In Honors 1320, which is a course about the Atlantic Age of Revolutions, I had for a long time asked students to create constitutions at the end of the semester. They had just learned all about the American, the French, and the Haitian revolutions, and I wanted them to reflect upon all of the things that they learned to write new constitutions as a group. They were tasked with this responsibility. And so I'd had them do this for years. And I decided this past spring they were going to do that, the same assignment, but then I was going to add this ChatGPT element to it. I wanted to make them use ChatGPT to create something. So I wanted to add this generative, creative element, not just a critique, but I wanted them to use ChatGPT to create something. So I had them create their own constitution, and then I had them use ChatGPT to create a constitution based upon 2 Enlightenment documents. There's a much longer article where I go over this in the soon to be published Teaching and Generative AI Pedagogical Possibilities and Productive Tensions, edited by Beth Boisry and Travis Thurston, who is here, that you can read about and that I can put in that same folder once it's available. But students were really amazed that ChatGPT just plagiarized. You know, they said, base this upon the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen from the French Revolution and, you know, the Bill of Rights from the United States or the Haitian Constitution of 1804, right? And students were like, well, this is awful. I have to prompt it so much because it's just plagiarizing. They were so disappointed that it wasn't creating something. I had one quote that was like, new, fresh, innovative, and young. And I was like, oh, okay. That's what you were hoping for that was there. And they were so disappointed that it wasn't doing that. And I think that that was an interesting point for many of my students to sit there and really reflect on what are the limitations of this technology. And I had a student basically say, well, of course, this isn't going to be creating something brand new. It doesn't have the capability yet. And that's the key word there. Yet at this time to have that same type of human experience of melding that in there. But this was a great idea for group work. It was a good idea to get them talking about the usage, but also practicing the prompting to ChatGPT. How are you going to be teaching them the appropriate prompts to use as they move through this assignment? And I had them submit that. It was really interesting to see how they tweaked what they asked it to do and how many times. The average number of times that they asked it to reprompt per group was 7. So it was taking them a long time to get to something that they felt that they wanted. That was there. Finally, in an upper division course, and there are some other examples that are in that folder too that you can look at, but these are just some of the ones I wanted to go through. This is one I haven't done yet. So I'm planning to do this. And I'm thinking about how I will use this in an upper division, really, like I said, the culminating experience for our history majors, which is the history research capstone. I'm going to encourage them to brainstorm with ChatGPT. And I'm hoping that they can brainstorm as they would, normally about some different topics, but then use ChatGPT to help them further refine their topic ideas, that they can use ChatGPT almost as a research tool. It's not going to be as good as using, say, the library resources, and that's actually why I tell them they have to use the library's resources that's in here, but they might ask ChatGPT to help them refine different research questions, maybe to give them additional background research. There's another tool called GPT Go that combines ChatGPT with Google search results, and I'm going to allow them to use that as well. So it gives them like a GPT response plus Google results. So I'm going to consider allowing them to use that. But I think that there's an opportunity here to allow students to use this as a tool to help them with brainstorming, but to teach them that they must evaluate the sources that GPT spits out to them, that they must engage in critical analysis and thinking about the information, because as we know, GPT can really fabricate a lot of data. So that's an important part for them to recognize, that there is fabrication in this, especially when it comes to information that maybe is behind a paywall, those library sources that are there. But I'll let you know how this one goes. This is a new possibility, but I feel like I've built enough confidence with seeing how students are interacting with this that I want to experiment with this. Students can choose to do this. I'm not forcing them to do this either, which I think is a very important part. They can do a traditional brainstorm and do the methods that they're comfortable with, or if they want to do this, they can do that too. But in this class, I'm being very clear that the result, the product that they are creating, has to be their own. They can't type in there, write me a paper about Betty Friedan and the women's movement, right? They need to make sure that they're the one doing the research, that they're vetting the information that is there. How are they using this as a tool and not replicating their own knowledge that is there? So these are some of the examples of things that I've done. I wanted to, again, just share that with you, share my experience of navigating this through, but I want to leave enough time for conversation, as well as for questions, or for you to maybe share some of your experiences as well. So I'd like to give maybe, 3 or 4 minutes for you to maybe think about some questions, Or think about things that you've done in your own classroom and how you're reacting to this. And maybe we could share with the group and have that opportunity to both brainstorm our ideas as well as to share with another. So let's just take, a couple minutes just to reflect, and then we'll come back, and you can use the Q&A, or you can raise your hand. That's there. All right, now that we've kind of had some time to reflect, I'm going to start a little bit with some things that Jessamine and Travis said in the chat, in that, Jessamine, you noted that increasingly faculty are saying that their profession/industries are going to demand future employees know how to use generative AI tools. Absolutely. Like, I think that this is something we're seeing more and more often, and we need to teach how to use that in a variety of different disciplines and backgrounds that are there. But does anybody have anything that maybe they have done in their own classrooms, or they're thinking about doing, that maybe they are brave enough that they want to share with the group? I think this is an excellent learning opportunity for us to learn from each other and crowdsource and share. I actually can't see all of the participants the way that my screen is set up, so you can always raise your hand. Yes.
Hi, thank you. It was great. I just wanted to share what I'm thinking of doing. I'm teaching a class in biology. It's all about, a lot of it is about writing, and my students are going to write a review paper based on the topic of their choice. And what I want to do next semester when I do it again is have them come up with an outline on their own, and then use ChatGPT to see what the outline from that, how different it would be from there, what they come up with. And so, and we could, discuss that. And the idea here would be to tell them it's okay to use ChatGPT for some things, but I definitely do not want them to write their entire paper with ChatGPT. So, giving them the exposure, but at the same time, giving them the right to use it on some things, but not everything. So we'll see how it goes.
I think that sounds like a wonderful, is it Ode? Yeah, I think that's a wonderful idea in terms of teaching them how to use it, and also having that reflective space and teaching them that literacy between what are its benefits, right? And what are its limitations that are there as well, but also asking them to actively apply the knowledge that you have been teaching in that way. I mean, that critical analysis makes them immediately have to apply the knowledge that they have learned and that they have absorbed. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Other ideas?
Oh, Christy, go ahead.
I'm happy to share what I did in my adult learning class this last summer. I hope it's okay, Julia. I really felt the need for not only me, but my students to have the opportunity to explore not just ChatGPT, but other AI applications that are out there. Especially we're in an instructional technology and learning sciences program. And so using technology, it should be something that we are encouraging and learning about. But this is something that even when I first started learning about it, I was nervous and scared and worried that, who knows what could happen. Are our students going to learn? Is AI going to take over our jobs and be able to do all the skills that we've worked so hard to gain? But so what I did is I had all of the students, it's an adult learning class. So teaching adult learning theory and principles and how to develop training and learning for adults. So using that context, I had each one of my students go out and choose a AI application to actually then learn about, and they had to go in and learn it the best they could. And then it's an online class, so they each prepared their own presentation on the application, what they learned, what were some of the problems they found in it, how they thought they, what was good and bad, but then how you could apply it to adult learning and creating good adult learning experiences. And so I know I learned a ton, and I know Julia's going to share the list of applications that we actually went through in that class. I still go back to it because I think, oh, there's something I want to do now. Which application was it that we learned about that I could use? But we did, I think the biggest thing we learned is not to be so scared of AI and ChatGPT, that it has its uses, and if used appropriately, can just benefit, in most cases will benefit us and our students and help them. I know that even just reading through ChatGPT, some of the responses that I get and still get, I'm learning as I go too, because it will always bring things out that I didn't think about, or it talks about it in a different way, or even honestly, how it writes. I think it improves my writing sometimes. So I think that there are a lot of things that we can learn. I think there are a lot of things that our students can learn. And, for me, I just realized I don't want to be scared of using it and trying it. I want to get out there and just go for it and see what happens. And yes, keep my eyes open so you can try and make sure that we're not causing issues with our students and, decreasing their level of learning. I think these applications, if used correctly in our classroom, can increase our students' learning, and we can actually get to stuff we want to do, like being creative or pushing the envelope on something instead of recreating it exactly the same. So that's just my thoughts there.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Christy. So I took Christy's class this summer on adult learning theory, and it was really interesting to play with all of those different AI tools. And it really did, Christy made me much less scared of the technology and much more aware of the vast variety of things that were there. I mean, there were, as a humanist and social scientist, there were some things that I would never use in my life, but I was interested to see how, it extends to computer science, to mathematics, to the hard sciences, and what are the benefits and limitations of that. I'd say I walked away from that class being like, there's still a long way to go for a lot of these companies. They're still very much in the beta testing phase of a lot of things. And so it made me feel, again, not quite as scared, because I was like, well, it's not great right now. Now, not saying in a year it's not going to be amazing, but it was very hopeful. Jessamine, I know you had wanted to say something too.
Oh yeah, just that I mentioned it in the chat as well. I think I'm gonna use your idea of asking students to reflect on, well, what could professors use it for, and is that acceptable or not, to have a conversation about it and decide together. So what are we going to do, and kind of make it a mutual trust thing. Like I am glad to agree to not let ChatGPT write my lecture. Oh, P.S. I'm not going to be lecturing, but if I were, then I promise not to use ChatGPT. And so what are you going to promise not to do? Just as a conversation to at least like maybe demystify it a little bit. And I also wanted to ask, this is a separate point, but I wanted to ask, you mentioned that in doing this work with students, you'd encountered, and they had encountered ChatGPT giving incorrect information, just incorrect information. But I'm wondering, is that even a concept that we have to unpack with some students, that there is such a thing?
I think so. And it's interesting because I just finished so another example that I have in this box folder is a midterm that has, it's basically a long critical essay. The same thing I did in that formative assessment, I just expanded it out and it's much longer that they have to do, but they're taking everything that ChatGPT has quoted or pointed to at face value, much like how they do with a Google search, right? And so I'm viewing it on that same spectrum of digital literacy in terms of how can we teach students to be critical and not necessarily suspicious, but appropriately suspicious of online sources of information. And this is a big part of our lives right now, is teaching appropriate use of online knowledge. that's there. So I view it as part of that same spectrum. But for my honor students in particular, when it started to plagiarize, the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen from France, as well as the Bill of Rights, it also just started making up things in there that we're not entirely certain where that information was pulled from. But we had this conversation about how is it pulling information? At that point in time, it was only pulling information up until 2021. Right now, I think it's a little bit farther than that. But we had to have a conversation about how ChatGPT worked. We also really had to have a conversation about the fact that sometimes it just makes things up. And I put in myself. So I put in, who is Julia? I'm Gossard. And it came up, I have to say, apparently, I am a chaired professor of women's history at Harvard University, which is amazing. I would love to have that position. I am not. So it was interesting to bring it up and in real time show my students, I'm an author. I have an online presence. I have a website. I have a faculty page, and it pulled none of the information from that faculty page. It simply made up things about areas that maybe I was adjacent to. And I found that really fascinating. And so did my students. And so for that moment, then they started typing in, like famous people, and it did a little bit better on famous people. I remember LeBron James was a pretty accurate description there, but then it started pulling up political figures, and it had a lot of political figures with things that were not associated actually with them, which was very interesting. So that opportunity of taking the time to do that with the students, to show the falsification in real time and then consider why it's doing that, made them much more critical of the tool that was there.
I love
So
that
Sarah,
idea, Julia.
yes, thank you. So Sarah shared in the chat, thank you for all the great ideas. I teach a multimedia design course and know they are going to use ChatGPT. Critiquing and editing the results is a good way to teach them how to use the tool without destroying their own creativity. I totally agree, Sarah. I think that's a wonderful idea. And you might consider in that AI tool list as well, we have some that are a little bit more for kind of creative design in there too. And so you might play around with some of those as well. I think, Canva's magic design tool, but then there's Dolly and some of the others that are creative there, but I know you probably want to keep their creativity intact too. Thank you for sharing that. All right. Well, thank you everybody for attending today, for, like I said, I wasn't sharing anything particularly radical or revolutionary, but I think sharing, my own thoughts, my own process with this hopefully has been beneficial, or at least got you thinking either to experiment, or you have decided this is just not your thing and you're going to rally against it. And that's an acceptable response as well. That's there, but I appreciate it a lot. Please feel free to use those resources. Feel free to reach out for any questions that you may have. And I just appreciate you taking the time out of your day.
Juliet, do you have just a second to stick around?
Yes.
Okay, because we did have a question from one of my professors, GB. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you do need to take off, it is almost 1, but just a few more minutes if GB, if you have a second. The question was, what's your experience with Google Bard?
I've only used it very infrequently. I haven't used it a whole bunch. Have you used it? Oh, where'd you go? There you are.
He's here.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah.
Have you used it?
Yeah, I have used it for the scientific part. I like Bard better than ChatGPT. I know both of them make up stories, right? But from scientific point of view, I think Bard gives more reliable data information. Yeah, that's what I realized.
Could you have students do like that fact checking we were talking about with it?
Can you elaborate that for me? What is
Yeah,
that?
so could you do an assignment where they looked up something on Google Bard and then check to make sure it was accurate?
Yeah, so because I was I needed some data for my research, and I tried the same question in ChatGPT and also Bard. I realized that
Hmm.
BARD gives me a little more reliable data
Oh, interesting.
information than GPT. That's what I
Hmm.
realized. Yeah.
I'll have to play with it more and see. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that could be a great assignment for the students too.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for your time. It was very good information, and
Thank you for zooming in. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah,
thank you.
thank you. All right. Well, thank you, everybody.